Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to show and grow a passion for studying God's Word. And I'm here with my friends, Julie and Grant Mangrum. We're going to be looking and starting a whole new series on the book of Colossians. And we're going to do some interesting things about what goes along with Colossians that perhaps you've never thought about. Today, we're going to be doing an introduction. Where is Colossae? What is it all about? And why was Paul interested in writing there? And one of the themes in the book of Colossians that we're going to talk about is Christ is enough. And we're going to be looking at that in a series called Colossians, the Tale of Two Books. And there's a lot of unique things about the book of Colossians that we're going to look at as we go along. But stay tuned, come back, and we'll get into Colossians, a new series. We're back, and as I said, we're going to be starting in the book of Colossians. One of the first things we do when we start a brand new series is we kind of think about the background. Paul is writing. This is the last of his four epistles to his churches, or to churches. It's Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians. The best way to remember that is go everywhere preaching Christ. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. And we're in Colossians, which is a book written anywhere between, it was written when he was in prison in Rome.
Okay.
And he was in prison between 57 and 62 AD, approximately right in there. He dies soon after 62. Nero has him killed before Nero dies. Nero dies in 64. So somewhere leading up to about 62 AD. We're not exactly sure. But let's talk about an introduction to this book a little bit. And let's talk about this. What did you guys find out about just the background of the church at Colossae? Where is Colossae? Did you find out anything?
Yeah, we looked at a map and it saw us, I guess, in the northeast, southwest, the southwest side of Turkey.
Okay.
Modern day Turkey.
Day Turkey. It's between Ephesus
and Laodicea
and Dystra. It's on a main trade route.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of the city between those, and it was a very cosmopolitan, very big city.
Mm-hmm.
Not as big as Ephesus, but big. What else did you find out?
We saw that it was a lot of, how do you say the words? Phrygians. Yeah, it was like the southern part of, yeah, there you go.
Phrygia.
So it was in the southern part of ancient Phrygia. So there's going to be a lot of Phrygians.
Okay. Now, in fact, in the city, the city had a lot of everybody.
Yes.
It was a very cosmopolitan city, like a lot of our modern cities today. There were Jews there, there were Gentiles, there were Greeks, there were Romans. It was a broad mix for a business city.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other thing that it had going for it, it was not only a business trade center, but it was also the kind of the center for scholastic. There was a big library there, and it was a center for scholastic debate.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of philosophies going on, and Paul is gonna address those in later in the book. and we'll get to those there. But there's all kinds of pagan philosophy and pagan culture.
Yeah.
And the church is growing up in this environment, very similar to what a lot of our churches grow up in, a culture that is not pro-Christian. It's not even predominantly Christian. And so they grew up in this kind of philosophical, ethical, debating, trade route business area. Okay. Now, what else?
Something like it's the adopted home of Oriental mysticism.
Well, that's this debating various philosophies. This Oriental mysticism it is in the Orient. It's in Turkey, which is an Oriental mindset, and they were really into really arguing different philosophies of life and what the best thing is. And that's this mysticism is saying there's a mystery to life, and it can be seen through the philosophy of man.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a headquarters for mysticism and philosophy.
Yeah, we learned too that they kind of, because of that, they kind of took bits and pieces from various religions and various philosophies, and they were trying to kind of integrate that into the church.
The church was in that environment, and the church was having leanings where they would say, well, that sounds pretty good, and maybe we'll just incorporate that into the church. And Paul hears about that and becomes concerned enough to write a letter. Now, what did you find out about the relationship between Paul and Colossae?
It was strictly just from his disciple, which is
Epaphras.
Epaphras, right? Okay. Now, Paul had never, most of the scholars agree, Paul did not start the church. It was started by Epaphras.
Right.
Epaphras was the first pastor of that church. And now Epaphras is in Rome, and he's really ministering with Paul in Rome.
Yeah.
So Paul has never physically been there. But one thing we're going to find out is Paul personally knew a ton of people in Colossae. He knew a lot of them, and a lot of them knew people that he knew and knew who he was. And I want to show you that very quickly. In chapter 4, he starts to name his team, and we find out a lot about Paul's team in Rome. And when he's talking to them in Colossae, a lot of the people that on his team, the people in Colossae knew. They were very familiar to the Colossian church. Now, he starts out, as to all my affairs, Tychicus, our beloved brother. Now, our beloved brother is a relationship thing, saying he's a fellow Christian with you guys. And Tychicus was kind of Paul's mailman. He's mentioned 5 different times. He's mentioned in Colossians, but he's also mentioned in Ephesians. He's mentioned in Acts. He's mentioned in 2 Timothy. He is known for carrying letters to various churches because there wasn't a mail service. And at that time under Nero, the Christianity was illegal. So it wasn't a really good way to send a letter about Christian doctrine in the mail of Rome, because it wasn't going to get there. So he used Tychicus. Now he says, Tychicus, our beloved brother and faithful servant and fellow bondservant in the Lord, he will bring you information about my affairs, right? He says, because I have sent him to you for this very purpose, that you may know about our circumstances and that he may encourage your hearts. He's going to have a ministry to you. And with him, Onesimus. And Onesimus is our faithful and beloved brother who is one of your number. Now, what do we know about Onesimus?
He's the slave in Philemon.
He is a runaway slave who ran away from Colossae and ran to Rome. And in Rome, Paul leads him to the Lord. And now Paul is sending him back. And this is where that double letter, he's mentioned here to the church in Colossae. And Paul says, hey, I'm sending you back Onesimus with Tychicus, and he is one of you. And he is a fellow, he is our faithful and beloved brother. That puts Onesimus on a kind of a significant stature in the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they know Onesimus. So there's a connection there. And he says, now, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, sends you his greeting. And also Barnabas's cousin Mark. This is John Mark, who Paul really had a hard time with, but this is much later, and Paul has accepted him, and John Mark has grown and matured because of Barnabas. So this is Barnabas's cousin, Mark. And he says, hey, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, sends you his greetings. So he knew them.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, he's saying, by the way, Aristarchus says hi. And also Barnabas, Mark, Barnabas's cousin, he says hi, about whom you received instructions that if he comes to you, welcome him. So they knew about Mark, John Mark, and said, hey, if John Mark ever shows up, welcome him in.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes on. It says, oh, this is interesting. He says, in verse 11, also Jesus, who is called Justus. They didn't want to use the name Jesus, which is a Greek term for Joshua or God with us. And they called him Justus. And Justus is a Greek name for that. And he says, Justus, these are, and also Justus, who is called, or Jesus, who is called Justus, these are the only fellow workers for the kingdom who are from the circumcision. In other words, Mark and Justus are the only two Jews on Paul's team.
Wow.
All the rest of them are Gentiles. And he says, only these two guys are from the circumcision, and they have proved to be an encouragement to me. Now, that word encouragement is very interesting in Paul's life, because here he uses, over here is my notes, and it says this is a medical term that means to soothe or take away pain.
Okay. Is it the same one that's used earlier on?
No, it's not.
Okay.
This is a medical term. So when he says Justus is a Jew who has proved to be an encouragement to me, he is a physical encouragement to my pain. And a lot of scholars think that he was Dr. Luke's nurse.
Oh, okay.
Who took care of Paul and his physical problems. Okay? And Luke's going to be mentioned in a minute. But he says he talks on about these guys on the team. Now, Epaphras was the guy who started the church in Colossae. And he says, Epaphras, who is one of your number. You know him, and I know him. He is a bond slave of Jesus Christ. He says hi, sends you his greeting, and he always labors for you earnestly in his prayer. He was a real prayer warrior, and he was praying for the church in Colossae. And that's probably how Paul knew about some of the concerns in Colossae, because Epaphras was on his team, and Epaphras was saying, boy, I'm praying for my church, that church I started in Colossae. You see the connections?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's very
Now,
neat.
that's why paying attention to these names is cool. And he goes on, and he says, I testify because I testify for him that he has a deep concern for you. And for those who are in Laodicea, that's basically where Thessalonica is,
Mm-hmm.
and Hierapolis. He says, Luke, the beloved physician, sends you his greetings. So Luke had been there. Now remember, Luke is Greek, and he had been in that Greek that territory of from Ephesus down to Thessalonica, and he says hi. Dr. Luke says hi, and also Demas. Now it's interesting, he doesn't go into any explanation of Demas, and I did some research. Demas is kind of a project. He's a Christian, and they know who he is. But at one point, if you look down here in my notes, Demas, he's a project. Every team has a Demas, and Paul's team had a Demas. And they're kind of fair weather friends. When things get tough, they split. And that's what happened to Demas in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 9 and 10. We find out things are getting tough, and Demas leaves the team for the sake of going back to the world. Okay. But when he comes back, he's welcomed back. This is in Acts 15:38 that he's welcomed back. So these fair weather friends that are kind of projects on the team, when they're hot, they're hot. When they're cold, they're cold. They leave, they come back, they leave. But that's on the team. And the church in Colossae knew who he was. It says Demas, and greet the brethren who are in Laodicea, and also Nymphia. Now, Nymphia is a female term of a Greek name, and some translations also use the word nymphus, which is the masculine. And some translations use Nymphia, and some translations use nymphus. But it's very interesting that a lot of translations say, greet Nympha, and the church that is in her house. And that word her, in a lot of the translations, is their house. So apparently it was a couple. Whether they were a couple named Nympha and Nymphus, we don't know. But there was a couple that had a church in their house. And he says, greet them. And I know them. I want to say hello to them specifically. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
And say to Archippus, take heed to the ministry which you have received in the Lord, that you may fulfill it. So he says, tell Archippus to really pay attention to his ministry. Well, that creates the question, who in the world is Archippus?
Yeah.
Right? Now, if we go over to the book of Philemon and look down at the very end of the book of Philemon, there is a list down here of greetings. And he says, Epaphras, who was the pastor who started, my fellow prisoner, greets you, as do Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, Luke, who are my fellow workers. Now, if you go to the very first part of the book of Philemon, you find out that Archippus is Philemon's son, and he is the pastor of the church. He took over from Epaphras, and the church meets. One of the churches in Colossae meets at Nympha's house, but also meets in Philemon's house. And you get that when he's talking about, greet. We're gonna see this in the first part of the book of Philemon. I don't think I have that page here. But when he starts to say greet them and greet them and greet them and greet your wife and greet Apphia, which is your son, and the church in your home. So there's starting to be this connection of Paul knew a ton of people, including Philemon, who's not mentioned in any of the lists in Colossae, because Paul is being rather, not sneaky, but he's being rather direct. And he's going to address Philemon in a personal letter about Onesimus. And we're going to see that as we go along, this connection between the public letter to Colossae and the private letter to Philemon, who is the ex-owner of the runaway slave Onesimus. And Paul is setting up in the public letter, Onesimus has some stature. he's a team member of mine, and he's a fellow team member of Tychicus, who has come to encourage you and minister to you. So do you see this connection?
Yeah. The interwoven.
Yeah. So Paul may not have ever been in Colossae, but he knew a lot of Colossians personally. And a lot of Colossians knew him and knew people on his team. Okay? Now, I want to talk real quickly, and we're going to end here. I want to talk real quickly about some themes. Now, one of the themes that you're going to see, watch for this as we study, you're going to see terms like in him, through him, for him, and by him, right? Now, he's basically going to make the point during the whole book of Colossians that you do not need any other philosophies or anything else other than Jesus. So don't be going off into philosophies. If you got Jesus, everything you have is held in him. You get everything through him, and everything is for him, and we have everything by him, by what he has done for us. So we're going to watch for those terms, and that starts to give us some themes, right? I want to go to the next one. Down here at the bottom of this, we're going to see some philosophies addressed, but that's in chapter 2, so I'm not going to worry about that at this point. But I want to draw your attention to the word all.
Yeah.
Now, you're going to see the word all. Just in these few verses, you see the word all. I've got it marked in yellow. The word all is used 27 times in 4 chapters, right? And it's interesting that the word all in the Greek, the word that's used for all, is not all inclusiveness. It's not saying all as in everything, right? The word in Greek is pas, P-A-S. And
Bless you.
Thank you. That's nothing to sneeze at. I'll edit that out. But in the Greek, the word pas, P-A-S, means to the highest degree of. If he says all your knowledge, he's talking about pas, the highest degree of your knowledge, the most you can get, right? And the other meaning that pas has is the whole entirety of everything. There is nothing left out. If he says all, it means the entirety of, and not only the entirety of, but the entirety of the highest level of whatever he's talking about. Okay? So when he says, look over at Colossians 3, chapter 11, and read that verse.
A renewal in which there is no distinction between Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave and free man, but Christ is all and in all.
Now, you see, he's addressing this cosmopolitan culture. And he's saying that you don't worry about race, you don't worry about ethnicity, because as Christians, Christ is all. Now, that word all is pas. And it means Christ is the highest degree. He is the entirety of life.
Very cool.
And he is all, and he is in all. And he's talking in the context of believers. So this highest level is in every believer. Christ is in every believer. Why do you need anything else? You see where he's going?
Yeah.
So that theme of all, we're going to see that over and over and over again through this whole book, 27 times. the word pas is used. And we're going to see that as a theme, that Christ is all you need. You don't need to bring other stuff into the faith. And that's the theme of Colossians. And we're going to see that in conjunction with a message to Philemon about his team member Onesimus. And we'll see that. We'll kind of study those in parallel as we go. Okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's stop sharing. Any reaction to what we talked about?
I've studied Colossians before, and I do remember the all and the in him being so prominent, but knowing about the pos, that even makes it more clear about
what the definition of the word all means. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And how much, the book is about the deity of Christ and how it's about who he is. And there's nowhere else in scripture where it's defined like it is there. It's pretty neat.
And the other thing that really strikes me is, now Paul's never been there. He knows them and he knows about them, but he's going to be addressing them bringing in philosophies from all over, mysticism, right? But he doesn't couch the letter in theory or in even in commands. He couches the letter wrapped in personal greetings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I really like about that last chapter. We studied it together. We'll just talk about it at the very end of our study, at the end of our series. But it's very interesting how personal Paul makes this letter, even though he's never been there. He makes this a very intimate, very personal letter, as is the letter to Philemon. But this letter to the church that a friend of his started, and he's never even been to, but he is Paul the elder, he is Paul the apostle, and he is writing to them out of concern, but it's a very personal, very intimate concern.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that he brings in all these names and all these personalities. And when we're studying the Bible and we come across a list of names like that, don't just read over them. Try to find out who they are. Find out about them. Look at cross references and see if you can find out when he talks about Demas. This is not a spiritual giant, right? But when he talks about Epaphras, he talks about Epaphras. Epaphras is a spiritual giant. He is the founder of that church, who's a prayer warrior, who prays for them constantly and is really concerned about them. So it's really interesting to know. And now he's writing to a church that has a different pastor than Epaphras, Archippus. In the first few verses of Philemon, he says, Philemon, our beloved brother and fellow worker, and Apphia, our sister, that's Mrs. Philemon, and Archippus, our fellow soldier, and the church in your house. So the pastor of the church lived there, and the church met there, and the church that's going to read the book of Colossians is meeting there. And Philemon's going to do a little squirming when he starts to see this letter lived out in him. But very personal concern. I love that about this Colossians. We're going to stop there, and we're going to get into this next week. And thank you guys on YouTube for I hope this introduction into the book of Colossians has been giving you some new information, some new insights, and we can study these themes together as we go along. You don't need anything other than Jesus. And he is the answer as we study this tale of two letters as we study this together. But for now, God bless you. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like it. And I'd love to hear your comments about the introduction to the book of Colossians. And tell me what you think. I'd love to hear it. For now, we'll sign off with God bless you. Goodbye, Julie and Grant.
Bye.
God bless you too. We'll see you next week.